Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Glenda Gallardo, and well, I'm very happy to have you here. Well, today, welcome everybody. Please, in the chat box, can you introduce yourself and share where in the world you are from? Yes, I'm from Lima, and I'm in Lima right now. And well, this is our first panel webinar. I'm really excited to have you here, and also because of the presenters we have presenters from Argentina and from the US, and well. This panel discussion is thanks to the participation of the members of the Global Education Professional Learning Network, as we strive for equity and inclusion. At some point, it's critical. Yes, it's critical to take a step back and measure quantifiable criteria and that can demonstrate these constructs, equity and inclusion. So to do so, it's important that first we establish these criteria and then the benchmarks through the assessment of these criteria. So this discussion seeks to help organizations and schools to establish objective assessments of equity and inclusion and link specific equity and inclusion goals to the organization's strategic plan. So we're going to start in order, and after each panelist, there will be a short time for questions and answers. So we're going to start with Andres. Yes, Andres Villalba. Andres Villalba is an Argentine EFL teacher who has worked in all levels of education in Brazil and the USA. Andres delivers conferences about innovation for universities, ministries, and teachers associations. And the title of his presentation is Culturally Responsive Strategies for Validity and Reliability in the Argentinian Context. And well, welcome, Andres, and thank you for being here with us. So take it away.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to present today, and I hope you can enjoy this presentation. I will start sharing my slides. Can you see it well? Okay. Well, okay, so this is culturally responsive strategies for validity and reliability in the Argentinian context. The objectives of this presentation are to share language policies in the areas of foreign languages, bilingual education with the Brazilian frontier, Argentina and Brazil, and bilingual indigenous education. I will also show you some material and culturally responsive strategies applied in these contexts. And I will conclude with the importance of integrating these elements of validity, reliability, cultural response, equity, and inclusion. First of all, I need to describe the location and the characteristics of Argentina in the continent. You know that Argentina is a large country and it is surrounded by other countries. It is surrounded by Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, and Uruguay. And the rest of Argentina has limits with the Atlantic Ocean. And that little hand, that little branch that you can see is the province where I live. And in this province, we have to apply a lot of strategies and methodologies because the characteristics of the province that I will show you later. In general, Argentina is characterized by rurality. There are big cities in Argentina, but most of the most of the population live in a rural context. In our country, we have all the landscapes, all the kinds of surfaces, from mountains to glaciers, deserts, lakes, forests, jungles, everything. And we also have all kinds of weathers. We have very cold temperatures in the south and very hot temperatures in the north. Historically speaking, the rural areas were first inhabited by indigenous populations and the first farmers who came after the colonization of America. And then rurality was later consolidated by the arrival of immigrants, especially from after the First World War. So in these waves, we had the arrival of Germans, all the Europeans communities mainly. Misiones, my province, is a special case in the country because it is surrounded by the countries of Paraguay and Brazil. That's why we need a policy as regards languages in a bilingual and bi-frontier context. What we do in schools, which are in the limits of the province, the limits of the country, is to cross Argentinian teachers, yes, under special programs. They cross to the other country and they deliver lessons. In the case of Argentinian teachers, they deliver lessons in Spanish. And from Brazil, we have Brazilian teachers who deliver lessons in Portuguese in Argentina. So we have an exchange in the border. In the case of Paraguay, the population speak Spanish and Guarani language. But there is a problem because the river is very large, so we cannot cross easily. Yes? And only 10% of the limit of the region is connected with the rest of Argentina. So most of the Misiones population is bilingual, yes, because of the context, because of the limit with Paraguay and Brazil. For example, in this picture, you can see two roads, and believe it or not, they are different countries. One side is Brazil and the other side is Argentina. And people cross from one street to the other just walking. And in this picture, what we cannot cross is the cars. Yes, if you want to cross with your cars, you have to do the legal way, let's say. So you have to go through customs. Only if you want to cross with your car. But if you want to cross walking, you just cross the street and you are in the other country. Yes, and there is a special point in some places where we have, for example, one Argentinian city sharing the borders with two states in Brazil, for example. Yes, so they are like 3 points, 3 different states in 1 point. Yeah? So this is one of the characteristics in Misiones. That's why we have these bilingual frontier programs. Then, as regards the demographic characteristics of Misiones, as I told you, there were different immigration waves, and that's why in Misiones we used to have isolated communities of Swedish people, Finnish, Russians, Ukrainians, Germans, Brazilians, Japanese, but now they are all mixed up in the province. Yes, They were first isolated in small communities, but now we live all together, let's say, and we have a special a celebration, the immigrants festival, where all the communities gather and they show, for example, their traditional clothes, food, rituals. Yes, that is the only moment where all the communities are let's say isolated. Yes, the rest of the year they live all together mixed up. That's why I repeat that half of the population is considered bilingual because they speak 2 or more languages. Then, as regards the indigenous communities, as they are a minority in Argentina and in Misiones, they live in small communities, in little villages scattered throughout the province, and most of the communities are hidden in the forest, yes, in the jungle. And as regards education, the characteristic in rural areas, as there are too many students and just a few schools, the format of our classrooms is called pluriaño, pluricourse. That means that you can have, for example, primary students and secondary students learning all of them in one single classroom. Yes, so in this case we work with the idea of mixed ability skills or students. Yes, you can have, for example, in the secondary school, the 5 courses of secondary schools working all together in the same classroom. Yes, as you can imagine, this is a high demand for teachers. Yes, teachers have to be very well prepared for this situation. Mentioning the COVID-19, it was sadly, it was a good opportunity to understand and to see in a clearer way the problems in Argentinian education. Because all the problems increased because of the breakout of the pandemic, and it was so the government had the demand to find new solutions to these problems, better solutions in an urgent way. Yes, so as regards the school year in Argentina, we start in March, we finish in December. We have a 2-week winter holiday in July. And last year, you know that the lockdown started in March, and that represented the beginning of compulsory virtual education. Last year, we didn't have face-to-face lessons. Everything was virtual. So there was a high demand of extra support for the government, and in a joint work by the government and the Ministry of Education, we launched graded radio programs and graded educational booklets for schools. The booklets could be used online, or they could be downloaded to be printed in the schools, depending on the access to internet connection. And on the TV, teachers and students had a timetable, a schedule with different lessons for the different levels of education, for the different contents, and for the different situations. For example, for rural schools, for disabled students, for technical schools, vocational schools. In Argentina, we call them technical schools, and all the different, we also had, for example, workshops for teachers, for families, and for students. Again, everything helped as an evidence for the problems that we were undergoing. For example, the most important problems were the technological resources as regards devices and internet connection, the lack of preparation for teachers, for students, and their families. Remember that students had to work at home, and as a sad result, thousands of students were left behind last year. One, in the case of indigenous education, we had a special section in the site of the Ministry of Education with material for intercultural bilingual education. So in that web page, you can find all the resources for intercultural education, indigenous education. For teachers, we had all the regulations for this modality. Modality in the law of education means that it is a pillar in the Argentinian education. We also had interactive material for all the levels: kindergarten, primary schools, and secondary schools, yes, high school. So again, as regards the results, and going back to the topic of this panel, we had evidence of a lot of inequality, losses in learning experience, lack of cognitive support at home, lack of appropriate learning environment at home, because we always focus on the schools. If schools have all the devices, all the material, it is okay. But we usually forget to see what happens at home. And then students lack time regulation, self-control, to organize their assignments, their homework. And another very sad result, many female students dropped out from school, especially adolescents from the ages of 12 to 17. Yes. So in order to handle, to try to solve, to have better, to find better results, to get to better results, at the beginning of this year, the main objective was to regain face-to-face learning. We had to do, to make some changes, for example, in the adaptations of health protocols, the reduction of students in the classrooms, flexible schedules for teachers and students. We had to prioritize our curriculum, the contents. We had to make use of digital material, and we had to teach our students to use digital material. And we also had to start applying new methodologies, changing from traditional methodologies to students, for example, project-based learning, flipped learning, competency-based learning, critical thinking. So as a conclusion, we can say that validity and reliability as part of assessment are important elements, and they are directly connected with our classroom activities. And so in this assessment stage, we have to follow, to see the importance of continuing with this, with the strategies, the tools, and everything that was used during the practices. Because a common mistake during the assessment stage is to apply something that we haven't practiced during all the activities that we had done in our lessons. And students' experience of both elements indicates cultural response. As culturally responsive education integrates the concepts of diversity and interculturality, teachers will also be addressing the important demands of inclusion and equity. Remember that diversity has to do with the differences. Differences are good, and interculturality is that connection of all those differences. Yes, interculturality has to do with the interactions, with the connections between all the diverse students. Yes, among all the diverse students.
2 minutes left.
Okay, so that was my presentation, and I will be glad to share this material with all of you. If you send me an email, I will send a copy of this presentation.
Thank you, Andres. That was very, very informative. And yes, so now we have some questions from the audience. Yes, for example, yes, and please, if you can share your email right in the chat, that will be very, very helpful. Also, maybe if people want to contact you. One of the questions, it's about, you mentioned the students, the female students. What do you attribute to the high dropout rate of female students in Argentina or in Misiones specifically?
Yes, one of the problems was that girls got pregnant in this process. It is not a problem. The problem is that while being pregnant, we had to do with other relative problems. For example, they had to find money to keep their health. In many cases, they were single mothers, you know, so they had to care about their babies. They couldn't continue going to school. They had to find a job, and in this sense, it is more difficult for women to cope with the caring of a baby and continuing with other obligations. That was the main reason. Yes.
Yeah, something similar happens in Peru as well. Now, Andres, there is another question about the curricula. Does Argentina have centralized curricula? And do the changes during the COVID help to diversify the curriculum?
Yes, in Argentina, we have the prioritized contents that must be dealt in all schools, and schools have room to include other particular contents related, which are relevant to the students' context. That's why we are talking about a cultural responsive education, because content can be adapted.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and well, then we have comments about the the fact that people can just border crossing is an everyday reality in Argentina. And well, then everybody, thank you for your presentation. Okay, thank you very much, Andres. This has maybe given us an idea of a view of a part of Argentina. Yes, exactly. This was about Misiones. Yes, and yeah, so you share a border with Brazil, and that makes education a bit different. So
Yes.
thank you very much. Now, our next panelist is Jody Kosten. Yes, and Jody, yes, there you are. Hello, Jody. Welcome. Yes, very happy to see you here. And well, Jody is a program chair from the College Education MAT Soul Bachelor's Education Intensive English Learning. She's a doctoral candidate and she's got 25 years as an English learner, educator, and teacher trainer. And she published in Viet Tissel, Faculty Senate President. Oh, you were a president as well. Awesome. And well, the title of Jody's presentation is An Action Plan for a Diverse and Professional Learning Community. Jody Kosten works at Westcliff University in Irvine in the US. So, well, without further ado, so Jody, I think we're going to start a bit early, but take it away. Yes, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Just going to go ahead and share my screen to begin the presentation.
Sure.
So we wanted to talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion and across our environments creates a learning community within our university. It was very important to us. And you can see my email is on this slide, but I will include it in the chat after. We're going to talk a little bit today about the background of the university, how we've aligned the university's strategic plan to the initiatives of diversity, equity, and inclusion university-wide, talk about the strategic plan and professional learning communities. So the Westcliff University mission is really to educate, inspire, and empower students to have high quality on-campus and online programs and preparing them for tomorrow. The vision is really to make sure that we have diversity and social responsibility and that we focus on excellence in an innovative global experience. And here you can see our values. And we take these values very much to heart, and that's across all of the university, not just the College of Education. To spend just a moment, I'd like to highlight that our university is 85% international students. So it's important for us to have strong accreditation in the United States for their degrees. We make it affordable because we have a lot of F1 students who are traveling to us. We want to make sure it's flexible so that it meets the needs in a variety of ways. We really do embrace diversity. There's now 92 countries represented as students of the university. And then we really do dedicate that to making it practical for them to find careers and being successful in the workforce. So these are the countries in which you'll notice are represented at our university. So to align the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we've made that a priority for our leaders and leadership. And we established a strategic plan that really focuses on global citizenship and advocacy, deepening the expertise and the depth of knowledge around culturally responsive teaching. We want to make sure that we sustain that and we continue to reflect so that we have improvement that is ongoing. So our strategic planning steps began with soliciting commitment and getting buy-in from our faculty, from our other people on campus, admissions, financial aid, advising, so that it was a whole university idea when it came to how do we improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, considering our demographics. We wanted to make sure that we provided the right amount of resources. So that includes time, providing people with the time to do their research, to formulate ideas, We want to make sure that we had the right allocation of finances so that it was fiscally responsible and how we looked at that. We assembled a team of people to help influence the strategic plan. So it wasn't just top down, it grew across multiple voices. We wanted to make sure that we were able to assess the current climate, doing needs assessments, talking to students, talking to professors, talking to admissions and advising. And then we were able to do some brainstorming activities. I have examples that I can show you of our SURF activity, allowing for everyone to have a voice. And then we did SWOTs, which identified our strengths, weaknesses, obstacles, and threats. And then we did a PESTLE, really being able to look at different perspectives. What does it mean politically? What does it look like from an economic perspective? What does it look legally? And, you know, looking at the last year and thinking of COVID and some of the United States policy at the time, at the height of COVID, was really scary for a lot of our international students and what that meant. So making sure that we were very broad-based in our understanding. And then we created SMART goals that were connected to the vision and the mission. How are we going to educate, empower, and inspire? How do we maintain a global citizenship focus? We established metrics. So how are we going to measure this? How are we knowing that we're moving forward? What are our action steps? How do we progress monitor along the way? How are we going to celebrate achievements as we achieve goals? How do we revise if perhaps something didn't go the way we expected? That adaptability and flexibility was really important for us to consider. Then we determined roles, responsibilities, and decision pathways. Who was going to be responsible for this? Who was going to include others in decision making? Where did those hierarchies fall? And we gathered a lot of data to inform our decision making, and then we implemented a timeline. So the benefits of doing this and being involved in this process was it allowed us to see a big picture, not just for today, but for tomorrow. So when we strategic planned, we looked at the now, the next, and the later. It was a 1 through 5 year plan. We looked for consensus. And when we didn't get consensus, we interacted sometimes in ways that challenged assumptions. Not everybody had the same beliefs. We needed to make sure that if somebody dissented, how we could come to an agreement around definitions and making sure we defined things in the same way, around approaching different ideals. We looked at those SMART goals. We made sure that our goals were strategic, that they were measurable, that they were attainable, that they were realistic, and they were time bound. And by having these 5 things in place, it allowed us to gauge our performance. Again, looking at responsibilities, and sometimes there might be one person who was responsible for a certain aspect of the strategic plan or moving that idea forward. We really worked on collaboration and making things team focused to allow that commitment and buy-in to reverberate throughout the university. And that established a lot of shared leadership, and it allowed other people to build their skills, and we could rely on the strengths of others and trust enough to know that if that wasn't my area of expertise and I was weak in it, somebody could help me become better. We allocated those resources, and when you allocate a resource, it says that's your priority. You can always say you have a priority, but if you haven't given the time or the people or the funding to it, may not necessarily be what you say. So we tried to match what we said and what we did. Again, we celebrated those short-term wins, and we celebrated some long-term milestones, and that improved engagement across the university, all in an effort to improve achievement for students, and all in an effort to make sure that our students were having high satisfaction rates. And at our university, we have a 94% student satisfaction rate. And then we wanted to look at strategic planning in a cultural way. So we wanted to make sure I call it amped up our culture. So we wanted to make sure we provided autonomy, motivation, and purpose, really delving into the why we're doing what we're doing, keeping students at the forefront, knowing that diversity, equity, and inclusion is so very important as we value and respect others. And then we made sure that, again, we progress monitored and made those adjustments. So our outcomes, we sought and we continue to seek in our strategic plan. As I said, it's a now, next, and later plan, that we eliminate those student equity gaps, that we have shared definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion to build capacity, and then it prioritizes DEI as part of our daily work. We wanted to make sure we increased communication around these ideals, that we provided training and professional development in ways that if somebody was not understanding, or that there was something new that needed to be rolled out, that we made sure that that training and the development and the conversations followed. And it helped us to strengthen our recruitment and our hiring, the way that you have people come into the university, retaining students, so that we could continue to advance DEI. Instead of retraining constantly, keeping people at that commitment level was a motivation. And they wanted to make sure that we looked at these culturally responsive pedagogical practices. So one big celebration that we had around outcome number 5 was we developed a rubric about culturally responsive teaching. We applied that specifically to our Masters of TESOL program. That's where we started. It seemed to fit there. We have students, they're interested in English language learning. We understand that, culture is an element of this as it is. And so we went through and we applied this rubric to all of our curriculum. As an outcome of that, we saw there were some needs for change, needs for letting students share voices in different ways, maybe not always through writing. What new technological techniques could we use? And we analyzed things and we learned a lot from this process. But we were so successful in our Masters of TESOL, we've started to apply that same rubric across the College of Business and the College of Technology and Engineering. So now students who are, no matter what they're studying, have the application of their curriculum to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and cultural responsiveness. So when we think about how we wanted to do that, one of the biggest ways that we could ensure professional development, ensure that we could have critical conversations, was through a professional learning community. And we established a professional learning community, and we would meet once a week, every week. And we've been doing this for 10 months now. And what we do in our professional learning meeting, and we'd love to be able to meet more often, but it's 1 hour every week on Fridays. We focus on learning. So we keep at the forefront of our mind the idea of how we're sharing that mission, vision, value, and goals. We look at data to drive our decision making, and always keeping the idea of student satisfaction and what we want students to know and be able to do for the success in the workforce. We created a collaborative culture. We want professors to feel like they have autonomy and purpose, and that they can take action and they can experiment with new ideas in the classroom for engagement and student success. And we engage in collective inquiry, where we read research together. We learn new professional development strategies, and we take them out to our classrooms and we teach them, and we come back and we talk about our experiences, and we look at results. So we're reflective practitioners, and we're constantly seeking improvement. When we think of our PLCs, we want to make sure that it's a twofold process. We emphasize our students, they are at the forefront. We want to make sure that they're learning, that they're mastering core content, that they are engaged around what is significant, and that they can perform and produce work. Maybe that is around listening, speaking, reading, writing, vocabulary, pronunciation, but that they're being able to engage in the same kinds of work, and we become role models. So we may model it for them, but we want them to be part of our professional community as well, because when they go out and do it, that's the real work that they'll be doing. And then we make that emphasis on teaching, so that collaboration with colleagues, that we are students ourselves and consumers of that research, that we act as leaders. We test out our best practices, and we're willing to be open-minded and talk about failure, because when we implement these processes, failure will come. And failure doesn't necessarily have to be something that's negative, because we can learn from that and we can become risk takers because of that. And when we engage in curiosity, we'll get more benefits from it in the long run, and we shouldn't be afraid to fail. And we set meeting norms, and we hold roles and responsibilities during our meeting, so that 1 hour, that precious 1 hour we meet a week, is very productive. We also do have a little homework. I shouldn't leave out the fact that we do have a little homework. We practice what we preach. So we engage in the research, we apply the research, we come back and talk about it. So we have to apply what we learn. So as we go back to that idea of alignment, when we implemented, we saw SMART goals. We applied the research. We saw professional learning as a long-term change commitment. In leadership, we wanted to develop the capacity of all that was involved. It's not just one person at the head that leads. It's all of us together advocating diversity, equity, and inclusion along the way. It's all of us creating support systems, not just for one another, but for our students as well. We provided those resources as prioritized. So we put our money where our mouth is. We provided the time and the funding to really support these causes. We monitored it, we coordinated our efforts. We really utilized data, qualitative and quantitative data. It's always nice to see those numerical data points. Nobody can deny what achievement might look like or how many people we're impacting, but those qualitative stories mean a lot. Our experiences, our students' experience, and that feedback. And then we designed our learning experiences in the classroom. We designed the curriculum around theory, research, and models to achieve these intended outcomes. So what we saw so far is we've got an improved cultural growth mindset. We've gone from yes, but, oh, that sounds good, to yes, and how can we make that happen? We've established that we can, even in times of COVID and post-COVID, have a safe learning environment, and not just health-wise, but safe in which to share ideas, maybe share some things that might not be accepted right away, or at least to engage in discussion around hard topics. And I'm hoping that around the world, you'll see that America has really engaged in a lot of social issues that have come about during COVID. And we really want to have some of those hard conversations around race and religion and equity around, women. And we really talk a lot about gay, lesbian, and transgendered. And we don't want to shy away from that. Let's really confront it and feel the courage and the bravery to do so. We've found that through shared leadership, we're more effective by relying on each other's strengths and being trusting enough to say, I'm weak in that area, help me. We have understand and we've gained great value in the process, and that we've set clear expectations. And we don't always meet them, but we're able to be flexible, and we come back around and say, okay, we didn't get there, what do we need to do? We have those conversations. We make sure that we communicate timely and transparently, so open and honest, and it reflects that leadership of integrity. We make sure that we train everyone. So it didn't just it started with MA TESOL, but it didn't just stay in the College of Education. It went through to College of Business and Tech and Engineering, and it spilled into advising and admissions, financial aid. These were college-wide efforts, collaborative across interdisciplinary. We really felt like we needed to have that structure in place so that we could have systems, and these processes would guide. And it wasn't just linear, but that we were able to see that without a process, it was chaos. So disrupting is okay, but how do you control it? And that was able to us to have a sufficient operating budget to really keep in mind those priorities and how we fund them. So we had concurrent initiatives, and we cooperated around those things, because diversity, equity, inclusion is not just done in isolation. You don't see it in a vacuum. We have to embrace it in multiple ways. We looked at those quarterly progress reviews. It was a commitment at the institution, and you see that commitment from the president all the way down to our students. And then we saw the ability to sustain these conversations.
2 minutes left.
And with that, I have some samples to show you. And just in case you're interested, I'll stop sharing just real quick and then reshare. So we engaged in some efforts where we brainstormed. So we started with what I called, we're the Westcliff Warriors, and we have a wave. So I made up a brainstorming activity called Surf, giving everybody a voice where they could state their opinion, and everybody just had one sentence to state. We went back and we unraveled what they said, allowing them to elaborate. Then we rated and prioritized our ideas, and we talked about frequency and next steps. You can see that we did follow with a SWOT, talking about internal and external. So external opportunities and threats, and then those internal possibilities and obstacles. Then we looked at PESTLE, as I explained, making sure we took strategic planning from the variety of expectations. And then we really started to gather together what we wanted it to look like. And so in our strategic plan, you find diversity of voice, differentiation and individualization, personalization, equitable access, practical connections, social justice. So you can see that we just really wanted to make sure positivity and confidence, all of these things are included in the strategic plan. And with that, it has been my pleasure to have such a wonderful opportunity to be included on this panel today. I will add my information into the chat, and if you need us, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you as well. And this is how you can connect with Westcliff. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Jody. It sounds like Westcliff is doing a lot of work on this. Now, there are some questions from panelists. You are in a liberal state in California. So how has that affected the success of your DEI initiatives?
So that's a really interesting idea. We are liberal for the most part, but Westcliff University itself is in Irvine, which is in Orange County, and that's a little south of Los Angeles, and it's a very Republican county. So it's actually a very conservative area. But because we are such an international place, and because we feel so committed to our core values, global citizenship being a key one, as well as compassion, we really, in collaboration, we really want to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the foremost, and that we start with that, and from there our policies ripple down. So I would say that, you know, local state politics haven't necessarily played into the success we've had with DEI. It's really more of an institutional focus that's been supported at all levels.
Okay. I think that answers the question. And then we have another question, and it's what student data do you collect to inform your goals?
That is a great question. There's a lot of student data that we collect. So we look at attendance data. We look at performance data when it comes to their weekly work, which includes engaging in discussions and participation. And then we look at, you know, obviously midterms and finals. We call them comprehensive learning assessments. There's 2 of those So we also gather feedback in the middle of the course and at the end of the course directly from students, so they can tell us what's going on so far in the middle of the course. And then again, the reflection at the end of the course. We collect professor feedback as well from every single course, so that we know what came up during the class. If was there any feedback from them about changes. We do observations in every single course, 1 to 2 times a session. Our sessions are 8-week long. Most of our observations are informal. However, there is a formal evaluation process of professors. And so that informal and formal data is gathered as we make those decisions. We look at our budgets, making sure that we've spent what we said we were going to spend, or if we overspent, we then can adjust those every year in our yearly budget meetings. So we do look at dollars. It's just the reality of things. There's a lot of different data points that are really integral in making decisions. Sometimes it's just simply in our professional learning community conversations about how we felt and what are we going to do next week about it. So it's not always about long term. Sometimes it's just week to week. And we've also got a really strong MA TESOL program and a group of professors that work really closely together. And I would say as program chair, I'm in contact with them 2 to 3 times a week, just because we've developed a rapport and a relationship. And relationships drive things. If you have strong relationships, that commitment moves and is a momentum, and the force is hard to stop.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's very important. Yes, that sense of community that we create. And one last question. I don't know, Jody, I work at 2 different universities, and when sometimes my students learn about rubrics, they don't get the idea. Was it easy for your students to understand the idea and the importance of rubrics?
You know, because we're teaching, so in our College of Ed, we have a Bachelor's of Education program, and then we have the Master's of TESOL. So if they started in the Bachelor's of Ed, well, even in our general ed studies, which we call integrated studies, rubrics are immediately introduced from the very first class. But as they're learning to be teachers, getting them to design a rubric and understand assessment in general, formative and summative, is very, very difficult. And even having them try, you know, so they know how they're graded. And the other thing that I find with students too, it's sad to say, is they don't look at the rubrics to even do their work. They don't look at the rubric first. They just kind of do their work. And then you say, well, you didn't do well on the rubric. And they're like, what? It's this constant reminder. And so I've learned as a teacher practitioner, I teach the rubric first before every single assignment. So they know what they know what they're going to be graded on right away. And so then as I teach through the lesson, they can think about that. And then I teach them to go back to it, and I give them time in class to do that. So I personally make rubrics, and that's part of our professional development at the university as well, to try and make sure that we constantly talk about rubrics. But I will say that, yeah, it's something that seems to be lazy.
Yes, and yes, I've been there. Thank you, Jody. Okay, thank you very much. Now, let me introduce our next panelists, and Chen Lin, and she's president-elect of New York TESOL, yes, so from New York, USA, and she's co-presented with Monica Baker, and president of New York TESOL. And yes, thank you, Jody, for your email in the chat box. And well, Chen, she teaches TESOL and bilingual education in New York City as an academia. She actively publishes on issues relating to TESOL teaching and learning. Her research interests mainly focus on engaging diversity as a strategic action plan for social change. And well, she's co-presented with Monica. Monica is an ENL teacher at the Hudson Valley and chair of the policy board of Mid-Hudson Teacher Center. She is a passionate advocate for English language learners and their families, as well as an active member of New York, I'm not sure, it's SUT. Yes, thank you. So their presentation is called Grappling with the Puzzles of Changing Language Landscapes. So they will share with us what strategic projects and initiatives that include the focus on ensuring how to engage diversity and equity and inclusion, yes, as they progress their work at New York TESOL. Thank you very much. So welcome, Chen, welcome, Monica. So take it away.
Thank you, Glenda, for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity. We're so happy to be here from New York. Welcome to everyone who's joining us today. I apologize for my random background. I'm in the PE teacher's office because, you know, I'm a teacher. I'm working in an elementary school building, and there, you know, as we know, there's limited space in many of our buildings. So I've got a class running with my student teacher, and I'm like, let me just run to the PE office. So thank you, everyone. So I'm going to get us started and talk a little bit about New York State TESOL and what we've done in our vision over the past year. And then Ching Lin is about to become president next week. And so I'm passing the torch on to her, and then she's going to talk a little bit about what's to come and our vision for the future. So I'm going to start us off. New York State TESOL is a TESOL affiliate, obviously, and we are, we're in New York, and when people think of New York, they think of New York City, right? You think of skyscrapers and Manhattan and all of that. I live upstate, a few hours north of New York City. So where I teach, it's very rural. Right outside the school right now, there are cows and farms and we work with migrant students. I work with many students from Guatemala. So it's a very different, so if you're thinking that I'm in New York City right now, I am not. It's a very different world. Ching is, by the way, so she'll talk about that. But the reason I bring that up is because as a professional organization in New York, we don't just represent one type of teacher, one type of student. New York State alone is very, very diverse, known for its diversity. It's the original melting pot, right? So but as a professional organization, we also want to make sure that we are being inclusive of not just, all of our immigrant populations and how to service them and their families, but our leaders and our members, our educators as well, because we're a diverse team of members of our organization. So taking a step back, it obviously has been a very, very challenging year and a half for educators. When when the COVID pandemic started in the United States, New York got hit very hard, very fast in March of last year. And it changed everything, as we know. We thought we knew what we were doing as educators. We knew the best practices. We had our bag of tricks. Well, everything changed overnight. And we all, I've heard more educators this past year than ever before say, I don't know if I'm cut out for this anymore, And I think, many of you may have shared in that feeling of like, I need to reflect and figure out how to move forward as a teacher, as just socially, as a member of my family unit, all of that. But as the president of a nonprofit TESOL affiliate organization, I had to reflect on that as well. Like, where does our organization go in the midst of all of that? And so instead of viewing it as a challenge, with challenge, you can kind of flip it and think, okay, this is an opportunity. It's a time to reflect, regroup, and move forward and bring change to the organization, bring it new life, figure out where we want to go from here. So that's what our presentation is really about today, how an organization can grapple with challenging times and how we can move forward and make sure we're giving our members what they really need. So, that's where really our focus today. So if you can go to the next slide, Ching, she's in charge of that. Okay. So we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion initiatives and projects from the past year when I was president of New York State TESOL. So as a leader, I'm not the type of person who wants to micromanage. I really think that leaders, quality leaders, are the leaders who respect their teams and communicate with their teams, but then let their teams do the work they need to do. And I think that that shows that mutual respect. So I really tried to establish a very, I almost want to say casual, but like a really close-knit, casual dynamic among our leadership team so that everyone felt empowered to do the work they needed to do. No one likes to be micromanaged, no, whether you work at, whether you work at a store, whether you work at a restaurant, no one wants someone breathing over their shoulders and telling them, now do this, now do this. We're all professionals, we're educators. And so that was kind of the leadership style that I tried to bring to New York State TESOL. So I really wanted to make sure our leaders, but also our members and the students we serve felt empowered and elevated to do their thing, to bring their own passion to the organization. I wanted to make sure we had a really diverse leadership team. We do, and we have our leaders come from all different parts of, even though we're New York State TESOL, we have an international executive board. We have members of our executive board who are themselves immigrants to this country, who are second language learners, which is, fantastic and really does represent New York State. We've also really worked on diversifying and being very, very inclusive with our growing membership. One of those, great things that did come out of a terrible time with COVID is that we said, wait a minute, our members don't really need to come from just New York State anymore. We can expand our outreach. We can broaden it. And I'm so proud to say we have over 3,000 members, and that's more than doubled in the past couple of years. And I think that really is due to not only our inclusive foundation of our organization, but also that everything went online, and we said the more the merrier. Whether you're joining us from Saudi Arabia, or you're joining us from Canada, or you're joining us from Argentina, we want you to, there's value in being parts of professional organizations. So we said, everyone come join us, come be a part of it. We really broadened our connections. Also, another thing on the list is team goal setting. I asked our executive board members to, throughout the year, establish goals. So, we have a vice president of communications, we have a vice president of advocacy, we have a vice president of outreach. And I really asked them to set their own goals and, check in on them and how can I support you? Which if you're if you're an educator, especially a K-12 educator, don't you wish all of our administrators came to us like that? Like, what can I do for you? I think that's what we all want to inspire us to meet the challenges ahead. So I really tried to have everyone do their own personal goal setting, and really, hopefully that would be motivating. Also, I am a practitioner. Like I said, I'm in a kindergarten to fourth grade school right now. Before I was really involved in New York State TESOL, I thought it was mostly an organization for people in the academic world. Our previous presidents, many of them had been college professors, and I'm not, and I don't have a doctorate. So I thought, wow, that's really out of my realm. But as I got more engaged in New York State TESOL, I said, okay, not only can I be an active part of this organization, but I want to show more practitioners that they have a spot at the table, that the field of TESOL should not just be dominated by university professors, but it should also have active voice from the practitioners in the classroom, those in doing the hard work, sitting on the floor with kindergarten students, working with our bilingual students, working in all capacities. So I really tried to include everyone, back to that inclusive word, that we're all a part of this and we all have a voice, and it should not be just one strand or one group or one demographic that really gets their voice out. We use a weekly Monday memo. So anyone here with a TESOL affiliate, I suggest that. It was a way to streamline all of our communication, make sure our members got a weekly, kind of like a mini newsletter on a weekly basis, so that there was that constant communication coming from the organization. Also, we expanded our advocacy team. We had an advocacy team, but this year we really, JPB Gerald is a very, if you Google his name, and maybe Ching Ching can throw that in the chat, he's right now doing some really amazing advocacy work and writing a lot about the role of race in the field of TESOL. And so I was so happy that he came on board as our Vice President of Advocacy, and he took that and ran with it. And he started a subcommittee on anti-racism in TESOL. And so that is something new that we brought to the table. And we have a WhatsApp group so that we can stay in touch with each other and share articles and ideas. Finally, because I think I'm running out of time, our hybrid conference is coming up next week. So if you are not registered for the conference, please join us. I say hybrid because this is the first time ever we're doing a virtual day on November 4th and in-person days on the 5th and 6th. And that was not, that was a strategic decision, because like we said, we wanted to make sure that we could have international presenters and international attendees at our conference. So we used to just do an in-person event, but post-COVID, we've now learned that we can truly embrace everyone who wants to come to the conference if we have this format that is more inclusive and accessible to everyone. So if you have not registered, register now. And I look forward to seeing all of you next week. Does anyone, we can wait for questions after Ching Ching, but I want to introduce Ching Ching Lin because, and Glenda, I know Glenda did her biography before, but Ching Ching Lin is I'm going to pass the official gavel to Ching Ching next week at our conference, and I'll become past president and Ching Ching will become president. And as I'm leaving this role of president, there is no person I think is better fit and ready for the role of New York State TESOL president than Ching Ching. She is truly the most dedicated person I've ever met. And I'm so excited about her passion for helping the organization grow and move forward. So Ching Ching.
Awesome. I like that intro. Yes, 8 minutes.
Thank you so much for Monica for your kind words, and of course, thank you to Glenda for putting together this panel and all the behind the curtain work. So in my presentation, I want to build on what Monica said. As Monica said, in 2021, under her leadership, Nice TESOL have launched a series of projects to bring the community together in learning from each other and build and transform community knowledge. So through Nice TESOL webinar, we showcased a lot of best classroom and school practices for lifting multilingual learners and the communities. And we also have explored a lot of diverse topics and pilot a lot of projects in promoting equity and inclusion. So as incoming chair, my priority is to build on this and deepen our commitment to diversity and inclusion as we move forward. And specifically, I want to focus on combating discriminative and deficit-based ideology and practices on the one hand, and promoting equity-oriented education on the other hand. So these three concepts here, diversity, criticality, and multimodality, represent the plan that I will propose to put in place. And of course, at this stage, it's still a proposal because it has to be discussed and adopted by the Nice TESOL Executive Board. At Nice TESOL, as Monica said, we embrace collective accountability and shared leadership. So since we have to work with international constraint on multiple levels, I wanted to prioritize on key aspect of diversity and inclusion, and that I think can make more impactful changes. So through my own researches and the discussion with colleagues surrounding me, I have identified these three pillars diversity, criticality, and multimodality, while keeping in mind that they are interconnected and supporting each other. So these are what we will use as a lens for us to examine our practices as we move forward to create a shared vision and strengthen the community. So in the following, I will talk about each of them more in depth on how I will implement each aspect of our diversity and inclusion efforts. So diversity, so our engagement with diversity will be organized around these 3 levels. So on the organizational level, I feel we need to continue to diversify the leadership so that we can better present the community that we are serving, given the history of the organization and also the TESOL field in general being a white dominated field. So on the leadership level, all executive board members are elected, but people who were nominated in the first place often come from the pipeline of non-elected position, and which are often recruited through personal and professional networks. So we need to broaden our outreach to continue to recruit people from diverse backgrounds, and especially people from minoritized and less represented population or communities. So, so that we can continue to have more diversity on the leadership level. And likewise, given that certain key leadership roles have not been rotated for many years, currently there is an urgent call within the organization leadership so we can strengthen the accountability systems. On the community level, so far our members are mostly TESOL teachers. So there's a need to broaden our definition of stakeholders, and collectively we find a way to invite students, parents, and professionals who work in the related field into the community. Our president, Monica, has done a lot of groundwork in this respect or area. So through a series of our membership campaign, we invite a lot of content area teachers to join our organization and become a member of our organization. But there are more, of course, to be done. And I propose that our membership can continue to be expanded through a series of innovative initiative. So for example, through broadening the scope of webinar, so traditionally, the webinar are used to elevate experts' voices. And I can certainly understand that from a so-called business point of view. Sometimes you need to have speaker with name recognition to attract attendees. So therefore, we need to develop strategy to invite the participation of more diverse stakeholders, such as students and parents. They should also have a voice in the platform. So to this end, one of the projects I would like to develop is what I call a community assets mapping project. Through that, we will invite people to submit an action project. So just to give you one example, in the action project, the teacher will position themselves as a learner and the research of students' community-based assets, and as an effort to lift the multilingual learners' voice in the field. On the global level, the EB members are encouraged to join TESOL International, participate in the TESOL International professional development. But we need to strengthen our connection with our not just national affiliates, but also global affiliates. And that's our way of developing our global perspective. So here I'm sending a nod to Glenda, to our Argentina affiliates and other global affiliates out there. So let's find a way to collaborate to move forward with diversity and inclusion, because collaborating globally can help us understand and develop more insight into where our students are coming from, and hopefully contribute to shifting the power dynamics in the fields. So next, criticality. We will continue to raise the awareness of justice and equity issues in the field, and find a way to translate this knowledge into action. And for this, we need to engage in critically examine our disposition and practices. So this year, some of us within the organization, we did a self-study together. And it's very challenging project, because we are not used to collaborate on this level. We collaborate over project, task. But reflecting together is still uncharted terrain for all of us, but it's very rewarding, and we would like to continue to use this as a tool to reflect and to use it to inform our practices. So last
2 minutes left.
Okay, I'm finishing up. So another way we will engage in diversity and inclusion is through fostering multimodality. So in the past year, as a field, we have seen calls to challenge the concept of academic discourse and start to understand the harms and discrimination it has done to multilingual learners. So this is a welcome direction, but this will sustain only if we as a teacher, as a field, put into daily practices. So as an organization, we want to set example of welcoming all kinds of multimodal text or submissions, such as digital storytelling, cartoon, infographics, vlog, etc. So we are now in the process of transforming our newsletter to support this multimodal vision. So this will more likely apply to other publication project as well. So I'm going to stop here. Again, thank you so much. And it's been an honor to be part of this panel. And now we want to invite people's comment, question, and share your experience in similar efforts.
Thank you, Chin Chin. Thank you, Monica. That's awesome. And congratulations on your next role next year. And well, there are comments from the audience, and well, just congratulating you. And then Jody says, I really appreciate the advocacy of TESOL in K-12 and looking at it as part of ALLS. Yes, and then here we have a question. Do you think virtuality has helped address diversity and inclusion globally, or not yet? I don't know if Monica or Chin Chin.
Sure. Well, I mean, I definitely think that's very mixed. I mean, I think that the need for us to all suddenly go remote really opened our eyes to how access is very limited. And so, when I have newcomer students from Guatemala, they did not have remote learning. We think we just, sometimes we assume, oh, everyone did what we did. No, that's not the case. And so students in rural countries, students in impoverished areas had no access over the past year and a half. And so, so I think in some ways the gap widened more than ever with the haves and the have-nots, and who had access and who did not have access. However, our eyes are open to that issue more than ever now. So now, I think there's more action being taken to look at that gap, to address that. And you know, I'm not just, I said Guatemala, but this is an issue even in the United States, you know, even in places where you think everyone must have access, they don't. And not every family has affordable, reliable Wi-Fi connections. Not every family has devices. So it's a problem that continues to persist. I think there's just more focus on it right now. So I think that when done well, virtual connections can, you know, really broaden everything and connect us and diversify our panels. Like right now, you know, where are we all coming from? It's so great to connect with all of you. However, it's once again, because we have that access that makes this possible and others still do not.
Thank you. I want to add what Monica said as well. So it does create a digital gap and create the access issue for us, but it also challenges us to think the role of technology in advancing diversity and equity. And through our experience, we also feel the technology actually, ironically, have broadened accesses just by helping us navigate the geographic distances through digital resources. We are able to pull in a lot of resources we usually weren't able to acquire through the traditional way. You know, we are able to search online and looking for the best practice in supporting students. So in a way, it's a mix, and it's really up to us to think an innovative way to use technology. Yes.
Chin and Monica, I have a kind of follow-up question. As you think through that, so moving with the COVID and the pandemic issue here in the local universities, we had this issue with access, right? And coming into it, we thought, well, of course, all students have access minimally to internet. But it wasn't the truth at the university level. A lot of the students that were entering the college or the university didn't have in Texas, right? Southeast Texas didn't have access to internet, or high-speed internet, or internet that would allow them to participate in online forums like what we're doing now. So we had to provide students with hotspots. But how do you do this internationally? Right? I mean, there's a whole infrastructural type issue, right? And so the question is, yeah, you want to create that access, or you want to give that access, but how are you grappling with that? Or are you just kind of maybe going back to some of the old things that we've done before, and which is what our schools did, right? They just printed papers and disseminated papers and brought that stuff back, right? How are y'all grappling with that as you try to, or are you grappling with it?
Yes, so we feel that we need to invite the teacher to be on board to think about this question creatively. So in our next TISA webinar, we have invite a lot of technology related topic, and not just to train teacher to use digital technology, but also have them to explore some innovative way of using technology that actually help us to provide more access to students, such as using phone to access webinars and lectures, and some of them may not be synchronous way, but also asynchronous of collaboration between students and teachers.
Are you thinking about, so I hear you talking about teachers, but sometimes this is so far beyond the teacher, right? This is a governmental or community type thing, right? Are you looking at other stakeholders, telecommunications people? Are you trying to bring those into the conversation to say, hey, how, as a community, how do we support our learners? Here's, spectrum, Wi-Fi, offered Wi-Fi, right? They donated. We had community partners donate computers, things like this. Are you doing any of these type of things to kind of, and how, I guess would be the better question. You're doing it, but how are you doing it?
Yes, I know the new state Department of Education, they actually distribute a lot of iPad to students, and there are a lot of challenges and issues. So Monica, being working on the ground level, perhaps you can provide some insight.
Sure. Yeah, I will say that once again, there's this idea that New York has access, New York has technology. When the pandemic began in my rural school district, we did not have that. And we had a lot of families who were very rural struggling with all of those issues right here in New York. So, and it still continues, because a family may have Wi-Fi for a month and then they don't pay their bill and they lose their Wi-Fi. And that creates inconsistent schooling for their children when we're remote. Luckily, right now we are in person, so that issue is not persisting at the moment. However, I think that it goes back to advocacy efforts. It goes back to those with, those at the table, those who have an active voice can use their voice to be the squeaky wheel on this issue. And as we kind of, hopefully are moving past the pandemic, fingers crossed, we can't forget that this infrastructure issue persists. We can't just say, oh, that was 2020 and now we're moving on. Because if we move on and don't continue to be the squeaky wheel about this issue, nothing's resolved in those rural communities. Nothing's resolved in those impoverished communities. I just did a unit with my own 3rd and 4th graders on access to books around the world. And we read things about how, in Colombia, there are biblioburros, burros bringing books to rural students so that they have access because they don't have a local library. Camels bringing books in areas of Kenya, and so it's also, for those of us who are practitioners, it's also about just educating the youth, educating our kids and showing them this bigger picture of the world, the issues going on globally, to get them, even as young as 8 or 9, actively engaged in this kind of reflection and thinking and global, tackling these global issues.
Thank you. Yes, that's so true, right? It's not just the school, it's like the families, your own children, so that we have an understanding and have the space to talk about this, right? Because sometimes it's just like in the classroom with my colleagues, but then what about at home, right? So beginning from that, I don't know if Jody or Andres want to add something else to round up this as a conclusion of this, I don't know, listening to things happening in Argentina, in New York, which for me is, it was like new information. Thank you, Monica. I had my narrow-minded idea of, because of the publicity of what New York, the situation there was, but now I have another view of what is happening there. So I don't know, any comments or any last questions? I do have a question from one of the panelists, and I don't know who would like to answer it. And it's about what do we need to put into place to diversify the leadership team and the task forces? I don't know if any of you would like to answer this last question. So yes, what do we need to put into place to diversify the leadership, the leadership team, the task forces at your institutions?
Well, can I just mention, my friend has a bumper sticker on her car that says, "The world is run by those who show up." And, what that means being that, we have to be, if we want to be involved, if we want our voices heard, we have to make them heard, and we can't let the others be at the table. We have to get a spot. We have to make sure that we have a spot at the table. We have to make sure that our voices are heard, that the table includes diverse voices. And if it's not, and we're at the table, we have to say that. If I'm at a table with all, sometimes there are things happen, committees and things, and there'll be discussions about our multilingual students and their families, but there will be no one, there will be no multilingual parent at the table. And, it's up to us to raise that issue. Wait a minute, we need input from the people we're talking about. We need to get them to the table. We need to make sure all stakeholders' voices are heard. So I think that's one piece, just making sure that looking around and us doing the checking. Who is involved in this conversation, and are we missing some really important voices?
Absolutely. Well, I think that's been a very fruitful afternoon, evening, or I don't know, morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, especially Jody, Andres, Monica, and Chin Chin for taking the time to be here with us, and all the panelists. I think Monica's words have been like very clear, and yes, we have to like speak, right? Let everybody hear what we have to say, and keep sharing. And thank you for joining to discuss this. So success, everybody. Have a nice, wonderful day, the rest of the day, afternoon, morning. And yes, thank you. Thank you very much on behalf of TESOL and the Global Education PLN. Thank you.